clear about why I don't think that this is a great pairing. It's because one of those two guards, CJ McCollum and Dame, are a good example too. McCollum is excellent on defense. Okay, so like you can pair these guys together when one of them can guard the opposing point guard adequately. Neither D'Angelo Russell or Kyrie Irving. Right. Russell might get there at some point. I'm not sure. Kyrie Irving has shown that he is probably not going to get there at this point. So I just want to clarify that being the reason why. Not because I just think that two superstar guards can't play together. That is not the reason. It's the reason because just fans, I think just in general, have a tough time with defense. So now, that being said, the Kyrie versus Russell thing, I mean, you started by saying that as a fan, you want to have the thing that you've seen a kind of version in front of your eyes. Do you feel that way about Russell right now? Like, or are you not as attached to him where Kyrie coming in would just be kind of a trend-setting sort of superstar type that you can kind of wrap your brain around?
Yeah, and I mean, we touched on this a little bit last podcast about like just perception of Kyrie, of his personality, of who he is, and what that would mean on your team. Again, he's the better player, and if I said right now, and I'm only saying that because of how young Russell is, and theoretically, he can continue to get better. I would say that right now you're looking at Kyrie is in his prime. This is his time right now. So it kind of comes down to my mindset with the Nets is that, are you winning a championship next year? No, I don't think so. We talked about how the East is wide open, right? But you're not bringing in Kyrie and a second-tier player in free agency and going to a championship. That's not what's going to happen this upcoming season. There's other teams still in the East that are going to be better than you. So if you have to look at it and think about long-term, what's the healthier option, then I think maybe sticking with D'Angelo Russell makes sense. And it plays in a couple different ways. He's a younger player. He seems like he really is bought into being coached by Kenny Atkinson. If you can continue to coach out some of the bad habits, and we talked about this before, that he can't be ball happy. He has to continue to learn to distribute. Now, that you can see that shift when he has better players around him. He may be more inclined to defer to another player on his team if he has that same level of confidence that Kyrie would have kicking the ball to LeBron, or vice versa when they were in Cleveland together. So it really does come down to who are you going to be pairing these players with. The secondary aspect of that I would bring up too is we were talking a little bit about this off podcast in terms of the contract. And you were giving me a little bit of insight about it as far as players' time in the league and how that increases the amount of money that they can be paid. So because D'Angelo Russell is younger, the most recent information I was looking up is that they'd be looking at offering him a contract somewhere in the range of 4 years, $117 million. So that's, you're right around just under $30 million a year. Now, the difference between giving that money to D'Angelo Russell and what he is as a player and how he can impact the game for you versus paying Kyrie Irving potentially another $6, $7, $8 million a year and what he can do for your team, all of a sudden you're talking about having the ability to then maybe go out and target additional players in free agency. So I can't sit here and just objectively say Kyrie's a better player, that's the player you want. I think if you want to have a realistic approach to the Nets' upcoming season and to the long-term future of the Nets, you have to look at it in this context. You have to compare how much money you're spending on a player, who else are you pairing him with, and what do you think the potential upside or I'll say downside or peak of a player is. Because again, I think that Kyrie is really reaching his peak right now, and that means that he's only maybe going to be at this same level, which is a high caliber player, no doubt about it. But he's not going to elevate his game to another level, I don't think, over the next 4 years of his contract.
I agree. I can't believe I'm saying this, and I've spent too many of my off moments in Nets forums, like just doing research for the podcast, which I've spent a lot more time in the subreddits of Nets land and Twitter land that I've ever spent before. I'm kind of sold on Russell over Kyrie here. I think that and I think there's enough context with the Kyrie, and again, when I say over, I don't mean like as a better player. I'm going to be very clear about that. I don't mean he's a better player, but when you add in the context, when you add in the age, and in the context being Kyrie is coming off a very weird year with Boston where he just kind of seems crazy at times. Like he says weird stuff and he's very philosophical, but and not in the way that kind of draws you in, like sort of like the philosophical way that kind of creeps you the F out, like sort of like, or what the
not
hell?
like in an intellectual way, right?
Yeah, like I've had buddies that are kind of like quasi intellectuals, and it's kind of interesting to be around. He's like, I never thought of that. That's a kind of a cool idea. And then you get like the quasi intellectual who just kind of just says weird stuff out of nowhere, like like they're on like a Silicon Valley character, and like all of a sudden it's like, what are you talking about? Like something like that. I think that's sort of where he's maybe starting to land, but there's just been enough weird stuff around him that he was in just like that I'm just kind of not sold on maybe bringing him in around the young guys. And you have Russell, who's kind of like going. If you look at D'Angelo Russell, if you look at the tracks of where these guys started in our NBA stuff is never linear, especially with stats or nearly with narratives either. But Russell goes from second overall pick, is kind of just persona non grata in LA, to the point where he just gets thrown into the contract to get him out of the Lakers. Kind of is sent packing and is sort of forgotten about. I mean, again, this guy was a second overall pick. This guy was supposed to be sort of like verging on a superstar. Goes to the Nets. The expectations are set at almost zero. Like no one expected anything of him. And then he's kind of just turned it around. Then you get Kyrie, also number one overall pick, gets just luck boxes his way into playing with LeBron, gets a championship out of it, ends up hating LeBron or whatever the heck happened in Cleveland, wants out, gets what he wants, gets traded to the Celtics, sort of becomes a superstar. It doesn't work out. Now he wants out again. I don't know, man. There's enough weird stuff around him that that's a few red flags. I think that. And at some point you can and then you get like the flat Earth stuff thrown in there as well. But if you get there's enough red flags about it. But let's look at the stats real quick.
Yeah,
you mentioned that D'Angelo Russell being a little bit ball happy, which I think you're correct. He's a very on ball guard. He averaged 19 shots per game this season in 30 minutes. But what you've seen also from him is year over year increases in assists. His first season with Lakers, 3.5 assists. Second season, 4.8. First season with the Nets, 5.2. And then bumps it all the way up to 7 assists last game. There was an increase in minutes too. But the assist per minute numbers are still up year over year. Are you seeing, having watched him play a lot too, are you seeing a guy that, like, could you see that number continuing to increase? You continue to slot shooters around him. You continue to, well, one, give him minutes, but two, get him more comfortable in the offense. Are you seeing a guy that could be like a 23-8 guy? I mean, that's probably what we're looking at if we're looking at something like a linear progression. Or do you think that the assist numbers are outlier? Because this was a pretty big increase in just overall distribution. Because if you think think there's a linear progression for him, then he's starting to look real good in terms of what you could get for the contract.
Yeah, so I mean, when you look, basically, Russell's been here for 2 years. Now the first year he gets hurt, so he only gets about half a season. He's coming into a new system, new coach, new players around him, and he's still relatively young. I mean, he's 23 now. But when you look at this past season, he plays in 81 games. The minutes tick up a little bit. And like you said, those assists also increase as well. I think it is, and I'll say this at a lot of points, especially when it comes to who do you want, one or the other, Kyrie or Russell, it is about the players around him. So when I look at his stat lines, I do think that, yes, this is a trend in the right direction. If you go back even the last 3 seasons, his field goal percentage is increasing. His 3-point percentage is increasing. Rebounds are, relative stat, but he's going to be getting those handful of rebounds a game. But the assists are the important thing. And I would say that if you compare it over the last 2 years, what you saw was that even the players around him, whoever they were this past season, Joe Harris having a breakout year, that made his assist numbers go up. So, do I think, to your question, can he be a 23-8 guy? Yeah, I think that's what Russell can be consistently for you. And if we're gonna go one direction or the other, then yeah, I want to sign up for a 23-year-old who's going to give me 23-8, who has kind of reformed himself with the Brooklyn Nets, and who can be with you for the long haul, as opposed to maybe what feels like bringing in the hired gun to make this big push for a win now mentality, which I don't think is what this organization has been doing, and I don't think it's what they want to do. So I guess I'm kind of off the fence on this one, and we'll examine it as free agency moves on. But as of right now, I would say I'd rather see the Nets re-sign D'Angelo Russell and then try to bring in another piece or two around him in free agency.
The only place I want to see him just moderate improvement is defense. If you look at the top Nets lineups that they ran last year, the 4-man and 5-man lineups, they were all negative. They all had D'Angelo Russell, and they all had negative net ratings, meaning, and for those that don't know what I mean, they allowed more points than they scored. So for all his scoring, every lineup that had him that played significant minutes, I'm talking like 150 plus minutes, the 5-man lineups. It's a little dicier when you get the 4-man lineups because there's a lot of context around that as well, and kind of who you're playing against and where you are in rotations. A lot of those had negative net ratings as well. Again, this is not perfect science net ratings because it kind of depends where it's coming in the game. But there's enough there's enough in there just to point to that he needs to improve on defense. And again, that's fine. The guy's young as hell. He's 23 years old, 4 years younger than Kyrie. Defense is the hardest piece to learn in the NBA by far. It's very difficult to come into the league and be good at defense, especially when you've been so good on offense for so long and things have been kind of easy, as a guy like Russell has been. Defense is very difficult to learn. And guys that make commitments to it will make year-over-year improvements on defense 100%. Mm-hmm. Russell has like the overall size to be a good defender. 6'5", 200 that's big enough to start to at least be adequate. Let's say that if you're committed to it. So,
and if he can do adequate, then that works.
Oh, dude,
if
he can be adequate, then you're really moving to a next level. And I'm not saying he needs to end up being like Danny Green or these guys that are just absolute lockdown defenders around the perimeter. I'm not asking him Drew Holiday's like this. I'm not asking him to be one of these guys. I'm asking him to be. To not just get sought out in every pick and roll and just be scream out as seeing opposing coaches scream out one when they want to just dice him up in a switch. Like that's mostly what I'm looking for. Okay, this is going to be one that we're going to want to see played out, I think, over the course of the. I think we're going to know about this one pretty much the first day of free agency. By the way, because anyone that wants to kid themselves into thinking. By the way, when I say free agency, I mean the first day you're actually eligible to go sign players. Anyone that thinks that these conversations aren't being had behind closed doors already is pretty naive. We're going to have once the free agency period moratorium starts or stops, we're going to see. I think we're going to have a pretty clear line about where the Nets are going to go. And now the other thing that they're really in need of, if you did any kind of DFS stuff or just watched them really at all, last season that they got absolutely torched on defense by opposing big men. As exciting as Jared Allen is to watch play, and he's a great weak side blocker, and those stats look great, and it's not a hustle thing at all. But it's no secret that the Nets just got absolutely torched by opposing front courts over and over and over again all season long. And you would think that this would be the offseason to start targeting just a competent big. And when I say competent, I mean someone that can play good defense. Maybe has a post game though. That is not anything close to a requirement, especially if you have the guards that we were just talking about, plus LeVert. You don't need to be a dynamic offensive big, I don't think, to play in this offense and still be able to just really, really contribute. I mean, what are you thinking here in terms of where there's been some brief Horford rumors that he's going to? Well, it's not a rumor that he's going to opt out of his player option and go looking for a contract. I don't know how likely it is that he would head over to the Nets. He's not one of the three teams that's sort of been really rumored about where he could go. How important do you think it is for you as a Nets fan or the Nets in general to get one of the bigs that are available? And we can throw out some of the names, but as much as we've been talking about these guards, that really wasn't their problem last season. That wasn't their major issue. Their major issue is that when it came down to defense, they were running guys like Rondae Hollis-Jefferson at center sometimes in some of their small lineups. That's not going to last for too long. How important is it for you to see maybe another more competent big coming here through free agency?
Yeah, I'd say it's paramount, and I think that's why when a name like Kyrie gets thrown out, all of a sudden you're going to focus on that a lot. But I don't think that point guard play or that's not necessarily their biggest area of concern, and they have a lot of areas of need. And in my ode to Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, but the one thing that he was a hustle guy who they would run out there and put on defense against these other players, and even against the big men. He was oversized and outmatched from a skill standpoint, but he was battling underneath against those guys. And as you said, I happen to like Jared Allen a lot. I think what he does well, he does well. However, he is undersized to be playing center for you. I watched him consistently get eaten up. And like you said, it wasn't for a lack of effort, but boy, was he getting eaten up underneath the basket. And you could just see, you could count how many games were probably lost under the basket at the rim, and just not being able to challenge. Overall, the Nets are a fairly undersized team across the board. So targeting somebody that can come in and kind of do two things.